Life will always present us with moments where every door seems closed, every path looks blocked, and every solution appears out of reach. You look ahead and all you see is a wall standing in front of you. You turn to the left and there's nothing but impossibility. You turn to the right and it feels like rejection after rejection. You look behind you and realize there's no going back because the past has already burned its bridges. That's when the human heart starts to panic, when the mind begins to wonder if the promise God gave you will ever come to pass. But what you have to remember is this: God does not need a pre-existing road to get you to your destiny. God specializes in creating roads where there were none before. He doesn't just open doors. He builds doors in places nobody thought a door could exist. Think about the children of Israel standing in front of the Red Sea. Behind them, Pharaoh's army was pressing in. On either side of them were mountains too high to climb. And before them, nothing but water stretching out as far as the eye could see. Every path was blocked. From a human perspective, it was over. From a logical perspective, they had reached the end of the line. But that's the beauty of God. He doesn't operate by human logic. He doesn't operate by what makes sense to the natural mind. In that moment, when the people thought there was no way, God split the sea. He made a path where there had never been a path before. He made the impossible possible. He created an exit strategy that nobody could see until the moment he revealed it. That's the kind of God we serve. Your Red Sea may not be a body of water. Your Red Sea may be a financial struggle where every option feels dried up. Your Red Sea may be a doctor's report that says there's no way out. Your Red Sea may be a relationship that seems beyond repair. Your Red Sea may be the weight of anxiety and depression pressing down on you so heavily that you can't see a way forward. But just because you can't see the road doesn't mean God hasn't already designed it. Just because your eyes can't locate the path doesn't mean your faith can't lead you to it. God doesn't need to consult your circumstances to make a way. He is the way maker, and when the road is blocked, he builds one. It's in these blocked road moments that God reveals his creativity. When man has run out of answers, when money has run out, when friends have walked away, when your strength has dried up, when every natural exit is gone, that's when God steps in and says, "Now watch what I can do." You see, if the road had already been open, you might have thought you made it through by your own effort. If the opportunity had already been visible, you might have thought you were smart enough to find it. But when everything is sealed off and suddenly God opens a way you didn't see coming, there's no doubt in your heart who deserves the glory. You know it was God. You know it was his hand, his favor, his power that moved on your behalf. Sometimes God lets you come to the dead end because he wants to show you that he is the God of beginnings where there are no beginnings. He lets you face the wall so that when he knocks it down, you'll know he did it. He lets you exhaust every resource, every connection, every plan so that when his provision shows up, you'll have no choice but to lift your hands and say, "That had to be God." God allows you to walk into blocked paths, not to destroy you, but to display his glory. The blockage is not a sign of defeat. The blockage is a setup for revelation. And here's what you have to grasp deep in your spirit. When God builds a path, it doesn't just get you out, it gets you through. The children of Israel didn't just stand in awe of the parted waters, they walked through on dry ground. God didn't just make a way for them to escape, He made a way for them to advance. The same God who made a highway through the sea is the same God who can make a highway through your storm. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he did then, he can still do now. But here's the challenge. We often give up too soon. We see the blocked road, and we assume it's permanent. We see the closed door, and we assume that means the story is finished. We treat not yet as if it's never. But faith has to remind you that with God, delays are not denials. Faith has to remind you that blocked roads are invitations for God to display his power. Faith has to whisper in your ear, don't give up. Don't quit here. Don't stop believing now, because the God who builds roads is about to move. You may not understand how he's going to do it. You may not know when he's going to do it. You may not even be able to imagine what the solution will look like. But that's not your job. Your job is to trust. Your job is to hold on. Your job is to believe that if God brought you this far, he's not about to leave you stranded at a dead end. He didn't carry you all this way to abandon you at the wall. He didn't bring you to the edge of the sea to let you drown in despair. If he led you here, he has a plan to lead you through. That's why you can't measure your faith by what you see in front of you. If you only trust God when the road is clear, that's not faith, that's convenience. Real faith is when the road is blocked, when the doors are closed, when the answers are gone, and yet you still say, God, I trust you. God, I believe you. God, I know you're able. That's the faith that moves mountains. That's the faith that shifts atmospheres. That's the faith that makes a way where there is no way. The same God who created a path for Israel is still creating paths for his children today. The same God who made rivers flow in deserts, who opened prison doors for Paul and Silas, who shut the lions' mouths for Daniel, who turned graves into gardens, is the same God working in your situation right now. You may not see the road yet, but don't mistake the silence for absence. God is working behind the scenes. God is drawing lines where you see none. God is preparing an exit where you feel trapped. And when the appointed time comes, he will reveal the path, and you will walk through with victory in your hands. The wilderness is a place nobody volunteers to walk into. It's dry, it's barren, it's lonely, and it feels like nothing good can ever come out of it. When you find yourself in the wilderness, you feel forgotten. You look around and see no fruit, no water, no signs of life. The wilderness is where prayers seem unanswered, where dreams seem delayed, and where promises feel like they've been put on hold. And yet, as painful and uncomfortable as it is, the wilderness has always been God's workshop. It is the place where he strips away what is unnecessary, where he prepares you for what is coming, where he develops the strength inside of you that you didn't even know you had. When God delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, he didn't take them directly into the promised land. Instead, he led them into the wilderness. That doesn't sound like victory. That doesn't sound like a reward for their faith. But God knew that the wilderness would shape them. He knew they weren't ready for what he had prepared for them until he prepared them for what he had promised. The wilderness wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The very place they thought was holding them back was the very place God was shaping them for destiny. And that's how it is with us. Sometimes we think because we're going through a season where nothing seems to work, where doors won't open, where people leave, where prayers are delayed, that somehow we must have done something wrong. But the wilderness is not always a sign of God's absence. It is often the clearest sign of his presence. Because in the wilderness, God gets your full attention. In the wilderness, he teaches you to depend on him in a way you never would if everything was easy. In the wilderness, you learn that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Moses didn't meet God in Pharaoh's palace. He met him on the backside of the desert in the wilderness. David didn't develop his courage in the palace of Israel. He developed it in the wilderness while watching sheep and fighting off lions and bears. Elijah didn't hear the still small voice on the mountain of victory. He heard it in the wilderness when he thought his life was over. Even Jesus himself was led into the wilderness before he stepped into public ministry. The wilderness has always been God's classroom for destiny. What looks barren to you is fertile ground in the hands of God. What feels like a dead place is actually the birthplace of strength, endurance, and faith. The wilderness is where God strips away your dependence on people, on resources, on your own strength, until all you have left is him. And once you realize that he is enough, that he is your bread when you're hungry, that he is your water when you're thirsty, that he is your shelter when you feel exposed, that's when you discover the wilderness was never empty. It was full of God's presence all along. We don't like the wilderness because it's not comfortable. It stretches us. It humbles us. It exposes us. But what feels like isolation is really insulation. God is hiding you in the wilderness while he works on you. He is developing your character, sharpening your faith, and refining your purpose. You may think nothing is happening, but something is happening on the inside of you that cannot be seen with natural eyes. God is building endurance, and endurance builds maturity. Without the wilderness, you wouldn't be ready for the weight of what God is about to put on your shoulders. Sometimes you think the wilderness is delaying you, but in reality, it's protecting you. If the children of Israel had gone straight from Egypt into the promised land, they wouldn't have been able to handle the giants, the battles, and the responsibility of possessing the land. God had to toughen them in the wilderness so they could stand in the promise. He had to teach them to trust manna from heaven before they could manage vineyards. They did not plant in cities they did not build. He had to show them his power in the dry places before they could carry his promise in the fertile ones. Your wilderness may not look like sand and heat, but it feels just as dry. It may be a season where relationships aren't working, where finances are tight, where prayers seem to echo back in silence. But you must remember, this wilderness is not wasted. This wilderness is shaping you. God is using it to teach you to pray harder, to believe deeper, to stand stronger. He is teaching you that his word is enough even when everything else feels empty. He is teaching you that his presence is the real promised land, and once you realize that, you carry strength that no enemy can steal. Think of Joseph. Before he ever sat in the palace, he endured the pit, slavery, and prison. Every season of wilderness was shaping him to handle the authority God would eventually give him. Had he not endured the wilderness, he would not have had the wisdom to save nations. Think of David. Before he ever wore the crown, he was hiding in caves, running for his life, crying out to God. Those wilderness songs became the Psalms we read today, Psalms that continue to strengthen believers centuries later. What looked like isolation for David was actually preparation for his anointing. Your wilderness might not make sense now, but one day you'll look back and realize it was the most critical part of your journey. You'll realize that if God had given you what you wanted when you wanted it, you would have ruined it. You'll see that the delay wasn't denial, it was development. You'll understand that the dry ground you walked on was the very place God poured the foundation for your destiny. You will discover that your wilderness was never a waste. It was the workshop where God built the you he needed for the future he planned. God has a way of surprising us. He rarely takes us the route we expect. He rarely works in the straight lines we imagine in our minds. We think life should move from point A to point B in a neat, predictable pattern. But God often moves us from A to Z to M to D before we ever arrive at B. His ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts, and the paths he chooses for us are often the ones we would have never picked for ourselves. But it is on those unexpected paths that we encounter blessings that exceed anything we could have planned. The story of Ruth is a reminder of this truth. Ruth was a widow in a foreign land, a woman who had lost everything familiar. Her expected path was over. Culturally, she should have faded into obscurity. But instead of returning to the life she knew, she clung to Naomi and followed her into Bethlehem, a place where she had no guarantee of provision. That wasn't the expected path. It was the uncertain one. And yet, it was on that path that she met Boaz, a man who would not only redeem her, but connect her to the lineage of David and ultimately to Jesus Christ himself. Ruth never saw that coming. She wasn't pursuing a throne. She wasn't chasing destiny. She was just walking in obedience on an unexpected path. And it led her into a blessing far beyond her imagination. That's the beauty of walking with God. He will take you places you didn't want to go so that he can give you things you didn't even know you needed. He will close the door you were begging him to open so that he can open one that takes you further than you ever dreamed. He will reroute you through storms, delays, and detours, not to harm you, but to position you. Every delay is divine. Every detour is purposeful. Every unexpected path is setting you up for an unexpected blessing. Sometimes the very place you dreaded becomes the place where God shows you his greatest provision. Think of Elijah. The prophet declared a drought in Israel and then found himself in need. God didn't send him to a palace to be fed. He sent him to a brook. And when the brook dried up, he sent him to a widow's house in Zarephath. Nothing about that path made sense. A brook that would eventually run dry. A widow who was preparing her last meal. That didn't look like blessing. That looked like desperation. But it was in that very place that God multiplied oil and flour. It was in that unexpected place that provision never ran out. The blessing was not where Elijah thought it would be. It was where God directed him. And how often do we fight God on this? We resist the unexpected paths because they don't fit our picture of how life should unfold. We cry over closed doors. We cling to expired seasons. We complain about detours. We forget that sometimes the blessing is not in what we expected, but in what God prepared. Abraham expected his life to remain in Ur, comfortable and familiar, but God called him to leave his country and go to a land he would show him. Abraham didn't even know where he was going. It was an unexpected path, but it led him into the covenant blessing that made him the father of many nations. The unexpected path is where God strips away your reliance on predictability and teaches you to lean on him. Because if you could chart it all, if you could plan every step, then you wouldn't need faith. But faith grows strongest when you're walking a road you didn't plan, when you're facing a future you don't understand, and yet you keep moving because you trust the one who is guiding you. That's where unexpected blessings flow. Blessings you didn't pray for. Blessings you didn't see coming. Blessings you didn't even know how to ask for because they were bigger than your imagination. Your life right now might feel like a series of interruptions. You thought you'd be further ahead. You thought your career would have taken off by now. You thought the relationship you invested in would still be standing. You thought you would be out of debt by this point. But instead, you've been rerouted. Instead, you've been delayed. Instead, you've been forced onto paths that weren't in your vision board or your 5-year plan. But here's the truth. You may be standing in the middle of an unexpected path, but God is about to show you an unexpected blessing. The detour is not your destruction, it's your direction. Joseph is another powerful example. He dreamed of greatness, but he never dreamed of being betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. None of that was on his expected path. But every painful step positioned him for the palace. Every betrayal moved him closer to his destiny. Every disappointment carried him toward the fulfillment of the dream. And when he finally stood as second, in command over Egypt, feeding nations during famine, he could look back and see that the unexpected path was actually the hand of God. Sometimes your unexpected path will feel like loss, but it will lead to gain. Sometimes it will feel like isolation, but it will lead to elevation. Sometimes it will feel like failure, but it will birth favor. The blessing is not always in the path you planned, it's in the path you least expected. And when it comes, it will leave you in awe, because you'll know you didn't orchestrate it. You couldn't have planned it. You wouldn't have even thought to ask for it. Only God could have aligned the pieces. Only God could have written the story that way. Only God could have turned the pain into purpose. The blessing of the unexpected path is that it reveals the faithfulness of God in ways you never would have seen if everything had gone according to your plan. If you had gotten the job you thought you wanted, you would have missed the one God had prepared for you. If the relationship you begged Him to save had worked out, you would have missed the one that truly honored your heart. If the opportunity you thought was perfect had opened, you would have missed the greater door He had waiting. The unexpected path is not a setback. It is a setup for something greater. There are moments in life when God's direction doesn't align with human reasoning. He will ask you to step into places that seem risky, to take routes that feel uncertain, to obey instructions that appear illogical. And in those moments, your faith will be tested like never before, because it's easy to trust God when everything adds up, when the path is clear, and when the resources are visible. But real faith is born when nothing makes sense, and yet you choose to obey anyway. When Noah started building the ark, there was no rain. The people had never seen a flood. The skies were clear and the ground was dry. To his neighbors, Noah looked foolish. To the culture around him, he looked out of touch with reality. And yet Noah trusted God's direction, even when it made no sense. Every hammer strike, every plank of wood, every nail driven into that ark was a statement of faith. And when the rain finally fell, the same voices that mocked him were silenced by the reality that obedience always positions you for preservation. Noah's story proves that you don't have to understand God's direction. You just have to trust it. Think about Abraham. God told him to leave his home, his country, and his family, and to go to a land he had never seen. God didn't hand him a map, didn't give him coordinates, didn't even show him a picture of the destination. He just said, go. Abraham didn't have the benefit of details. All he had was a word from God. And he obeyed. He stepped out into the unknown, not because it made sense, but because he trusted the one who gave the instruction. And that trust positioned him to become the father of many nations. Faith will always require you to move beyond what you understand. God's direction will sometimes feel like it contradicts logic. He told Peter to step out of the boat and walk on water. That command didn't make sense. Water doesn't hold weight. Waves don't become solid ground. Yet when Peter obeyed, he experienced the miraculous. He walked where no man had walked before, not because it made sense, but because it was God's word. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, the impossible became possible. And that is the same challenge you and I face today. God will sometimes lead you into places that defy reason. He will tell you to forgive someone who hurt you deeply when everything in your heart wants to hold on to bitterness. He will tell you to give when your finances are already tight. He will tell you to pray when you're weary, to stand when you're tired, to believe when you're discouraged. None of it makes sense to the natural mind, but it positions you for blessings you cannot receive any other way. The truth is, God sees what we cannot see. His perspective is higher. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows where the danger lies, where the blessing is hidden, where the breakthrough is waiting. So when he directs your steps in a way that seems confusing, it's not to harm you. It's to protect you. The children of Israel had to learn this in the wilderness. God didn't lead them on the shortest route to the promised land. He took them the long way around. To them, it didn't make sense. Why go in circles when the direct route was right there? But God knew that if they went the short way, they would encounter battles they weren't ready to fight. The long route was not punishment. It was protection. The detour was their development. The delay was their preparation. That's why you can't always rely on your own understanding. Proverbs reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and lean not on our own understanding, but in all our ways acknowledge him, and he will direct our paths. Leaning on our own understanding will keep us trapped in the realm of what is safe, predictable, and ordinary. Trusting God's direction takes us into the realm of the extraordinary, where miracles happen and promises are fulfilled. Sometimes trusting God's direction means staying when you want to run. Sometimes it means moving when you'd rather stay comfortable. Sometimes it means letting go when everything in you wants to hold on. But if you only obey when it makes sense, you'll miss out on the supernatural. If you only walk by sight, you'll never know what it means to walk by faith. Consider the widow in 2 Kings who had only a small jar of oil left. The prophet told her to gather as many empty vessels as she could find and begin to pour out her oil into them. Logically, that didn't make sense. How could one small jar fill multiple containers? But she obeyed, and as she poured, the oil kept flowing. The provision came not because it made sense, but because she trusted God's direction. Her obedience unlocked her overflow. There will be seasons when God will ask you to do things that stretch your faith. He will push you out of comfort zones. He will strip away crutches. He will silence familiar voices because he wants you to trust him completely. Trust is not proven when the path is clear. Trust is proven when the path makes no sense. And when you walk by faith through the confusion, when you obey in the dark, you discover that God is always faithful to bring you into the light. Your job is not to figure out the details. Your job is to trust the direction. God doesn't need you to map out the road. He just needs you to take the next step. Sometimes all he gives you is one step at a time. He doesn't reveal the whole journey, because if he showed you everything, you might run from it. He reveals just enough for you to obey today, and when you obey today, he reveals what's next tomorrow. Step by step, obedience by obedience, trust by trust, you arrive at the place he designed for you all along. That's why you can't wait until you understand everything to obey. If you wait for it to make sense, you'll be waiting forever. You'll miss doors, you'll miss opportunities, you'll miss miracles, all because you wanted explanation instead of revelation. God never promised explanations. He promised his presence. He never promised details. He promised direction. And if you'll trust his direction, even when it makes no sense, you'll see blessings flow in ways that will leave you in awe